Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of 5460, the Joe West podcast. I'm Mike Claiborne, and our special guest today, he's done a lot of things in the game of baseball. He's a son of a Hall of Famer. He had a great career as a player himself. He's coached, and he's even a broadcaster. So he's done just about everything that baseball can offer. It's always a pleasure to visit with one of our favorites, Eduardo Perez. Eduardo, thank you so much for being part of what we do.
Man, are you kidding me? I wouldn't miss this for anything. The stories that I've learned from Joe and you, are you kidding me? I'm actually honored to be here with both of you guys.
All right. So my first question always is, how did you and Joe meet the first time?
I think I was a little kid running around Riverfront Stadium. Come in a little bit later, and as kids, we used to run around, especially in the tunnels of Riverfront, then Synergy, and now no longer, where while the players were out doing their batting practice and coming back into the clubhouse, we would just play. And we're talking about Ken Griffey Jr. We're talking about just a lot of young kids, including my brother, the McRays. We were all there, the Lee Juniors, and that's what we did and have a good time just playing baseball in the tunnels. And the umpires would walk in, and from all the greats that have been there, that have umpired the game and that played also against the Reds, we were able to always get to know them there. So for me, it's an honor to have not only seen Joe when I was in those tunnels, but then all of a sudden see him also as a son of a major leaguer in the dugouts, then all of a sudden playing at the major league level. And getting that straight call from Joe, just like it was with Frank Pulley and all the other greats that have been able to wear that uniform and do it right.
Well, I can remember all those kids running around the tunnel, and I think the only person that had more fun in those tunnels than you guys was probably the Philly Fanatic. He did more jokes and everything else in those tunnels, but I think he's still a little kid. But that's true. I can remember the first time Pete Rose's kid came to our locker room in a spring training game, and he had these shoes on with cleats, and you could tell they were way too big for him, but he liked to hear him click on the concrete. And Joe Morgan had given him a pair of shoes and stuffed toilet paper in the toes so they would fit.
But you know what, though? That just tells you how little Pete Jr. was, because if Joe Morgan's shoes were big on him, back then. And the great thing is, Joe, that all those kids, including Pete Jr., who was my best friend growing up, and we still talk to this day and have great conversations and great memories of the past. It's fun to hear his name, and along with all the other kids that I ended up growing up with.
Well, Eduardo, for you as a youngster, that had to be a real kick. Being the son of a Hall of Famer, Tony Perez, and being around all those other great players on the last team that actually won back-to-back from the National League, the Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine. How much baseball were you guys learning? Because I would assume with Sparky Anderson being the manager, you guys had to be sponges at that point as far as the game being taught to you from these guys.
Absolutely. We had some rules. And we were 5, 6, 7 years of age, and some of us, my brother was 9 and everything. We had rules that we had to follow. So it wasn't like we just showed up with our moms and that was it. No, if we were to go early to the ballpark, we knew when we were allowed on the field, when we had to leave. When the players came out to do their job, that's when we went to the tunnels to do our job, to continue to play. But most importantly, Sparky would pull us aside in spring training, would bring us all in. And I learned this from him, and I think it's a great asset for any future manager out there, is embrace the family. He would let the kids know, look, boys, if we win, you're allowed in the clubhouse after the game. You're allowed in the clubhouse before the media after the game. If we lose, and there wasn't a lot of losing going on with the Reds in 75 and 76, but if we did lose, we weren't allowed in the clubhouse at all. Not even after the media had left, not even after most of the players have left. That is sacred ground. That the players are reflecting on why they ended up losing, so they can leave it all there and then go home to the family. I thought it was real cool. Another rule that we had, Joe might not like this one, but I sure did get a kick out of it, was when when the game started, we had to be in our seats to watch the game. And every time a call would go against the Reds, we would have to yell at the umpires. That's the one. My go-to line was, "Hey, umpire, you need glasses." And we loved it. And every time a call strike, we would yell, and it was hilarious. The fans around us thought that we were cute, but we were being serious about it. We're like, "You missed the call." And as Joe would later tell me, he said, "Eduardo, in all the years in the big leagues, I never missed a call. That doesn't mean I got them all right, but you never."
Yeah, you guys were a lot quieter when you played.
Merrill made sure of it quickly. I get to the big leagues, and I think it was my second or third game in the big leagues. He's behind the plate, and it was a pitch that maybe it was outside, maybe it wasn't. And he would go, and I'm like, "Where was that there?" Where he goes, "That's the Hall of Fame pitch." I go, "Yeah, but that's not a Hall of Famer on the pitch." But it was a Hall of Fame pitch.
Yeah.
Well, you've had the gift of gab and you talk to everybody. You're such an outgoing person. What was the conversations like with you and some of the umpires, and how many times did you and Joe have your moments?
Oh, we had our moments, but it was always with respect. And I think, you have respect for those that have been doing it for a long time. You have respect for those that came up through the system and were able to then do it at the major league level. That was always one thing that my father and all the other big leaguers always taught us, was get to know who they are. It's not just the men in blue. It's who they are as people. And to this day, when I broadcast games, and I've done this here every Sunday, I go into the umpires clubhouse. I do it every time Joe was in a game. I make sure that I go into the clubhouse and go see them to see how they are doing as people. Because most importantly, it's we're all in this together. We all have a job to do. Some days are better than others. Big league players go 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts, and some days they go 4 for 4. And it's the same thing when it comes to the umpires. It's the same thing when it comes to the fans. It's the same thing when it comes to the broadcasters, that you're not going to have your A game. You wish you did, but sometimes it happens. And getting to know them is the most important part, I think, when it comes to it, from McSherry to Frank Poy, who was one of my favorites. We used to imitate it. My brother and I and all the other kids used to imitate the umpire, the calls. I thought that was the coolest part of growing up. But at the end of the day, it's about family, and family includes everyone on that field.
I think that's a good point, and I've often said that. In fact, I think it was a year ago when we started checking gloves, and the pitching coach for the Cardinals, Maddox, brought all the gloves in to the umpire's locker room. Says, "We're bringing them all to you now. If there's a bad one, throw it out now." The player rep was there, the big left-handed pitcher,
Andrew Miller.
Yeah, and I said, people don't understand. We're all in this together. We're all part of the family. I said, now families are going to have arguments every now and then. Like you have arguments with your kids, you have arguments with your wife, but that's just going to happen. But I think a lot of people don't understand that the baseball industry is a family of people, like you just said, trying to do the very best they can every time they go out there. And like you said, there's going to be successes and there's going to be failures. And so I think that's a very good point, that as one of the reasons we're doing this show is to show everybody that umpires aren't the two-headed monsters that everybody believes they are. And umpires.
Well, when you strike out in a strike 3 call, you feel that it's like maybe 6 or 7 inches outside. I might have some words.
Well,
Right.
But that's part of the game, I mean, what are you going to do when that machine calls you out and the ball bounces?
You're right, and this is the thing. And what I love about the purity of the game. I remember one time it was Charlie Relaford was behind the plate in San Francisco, and it was a blowout. San Francisco was absolutely just crushing us. I was with the Reds, and even Lenny Harris ended up pitching in this game. And I remember coming up to the plate, and Charlie said, it's going to be a big zone. We need to get out of here. And I said, yes, sir, no problem. I love that because I grew up on that. You know, it's okay. Let's open up the zone. Let's go. And when the machine started coming in, it was West, the first machine that came in. Then from there, they moved on to others for the evaluation of your job. I think there should be a point where let's turn those machines off and let's get going. Let's move. Don't, you know, and I get it because there comes a time where if it's a blowout, it's a blowout. The other day, Sunday, we saw Albert Pujols on the mound. Sunday night. But at the same time, it's time to turn that system off and let's just get this game over with, right? But you, as umpires, are still being evaluated, even in a blowout, when it's a non-pitcher on the mound.
Yeah, and you know, when we first put in that Questec machine, Kurt Schilling took a bat to one of those machines and beat it to death. So, and I've told this story many times, but I can remember working with Andy Fletcher, and I'm working across from him at second base, and he had a great game the night before he comes to me, and he says, you know, he said, the machine said I missed 6 pitches. I thought I had a good game. And I mean, he's down in the dumps because they live and die by this machine, you know, because they want to do the very best they can. And he said, the machine said I missed 6 pitches. I said, well, I was working across from me. I didn't see any pitch that anybody even argued. And I said, how many did the machine miss? He said, oh, it didn't track 14. I said, let me get this straight. The machine missed twice as many pitches as you did. And that's what we're going to use to call balls.
So, you know, I've always said that the best utility player on the field are the umpires. You look at it, right? By the way, one thing I never asked Joe was, so what was your favorite position to umpire? Was it behind the plate?
Well, I paid a lot more attention when they were throwing a ball at me than I did when I was working at third base. But the funny thing about the different angles that you have to get into to call a play, you can get out of position anywhere out there. I mean, sometimes the players will take you out of position. Sometimes you'll run yourself out of position. The most famous, or I should say infamous call that Don Deckier had, he over-hustled in the World Series and missed the play at first base. And everybody in St. Louis blames him for the Cardinals losing that World Series, but that wasn't fair at all. He was over-hustling because he was in the World Series and he ran himself out of position. Jimmy Joyce's play with
perfect game.
Yeah, the pitcher in Detroit. When Cabrera went to get the ball, Joyce went one way, and it was the wrong way. So he pushed himself out of position because the player went one. He was adjusting to who was going to field the ball. And that happens. And that's why we put replay in. And that's because we wanted to fix the mistakes that we could. But there's certain things that you can't fix. And there's certain things that replay can't even fix that they don't know. I had a ball in right field in the playoffs. Altuve hit a ball in against, who was it, Boston? Yeah. And the outfielder jumped up for the ball, and the spectator closed his glove. Now, the question was the glove over the fence where the spectator could interfere, or was it over the playing field where the spectator couldn't? So it appeared to me from where I was that he was over the playing field. So I called interference and called Altuve out. And we had told baseball from the beginning, the first place we need cameras is down the fence line, looking straight down the fence line to see if the ball's over the fence or not over the fence. And don't you know, they didn't have that angle. So, I mean, one of the first things we wanted, because we're so far away that we can't see that as accurately as we should, The baseball's yet to put it in.
Right.
So those, I mean, you could put it on a foul pole and leave it there permanently. You wouldn't have to move it every day. But baseball never put it in. And it was funny because the next day, Rita and I went to lunch with a famous lawyer down there, and he's sitting outside this Italian restaurant, and he's smoking a cigar, drinking a glass of red wine, and he's looking at the buildings across the street. So when we pulled up, I said, "What are you doing?" His name was Sam O'Donnell. I said, "Sam, what are you doing?" He said, "I'm looking for snipers. I think you're safe."
Hey, Eduardo, for you as a player and as a coach, and now as a broadcaster, what would you like to see more of and less of in the game?
Well, I'd love to see more, believe it or not, small ball when it comes to strategy involved. I think obviously National League losing the designated hitter, we're not going to see a lot of the small stuff we see. And I'm not talking just about the bunting or the hit and run. I'm talking about just that play at second base where the runner's coming in to break two, and he's going to change the angle of how that second baseman is going to receive the baseball. If he's coming across the bat, if he's going to take a step back to avoid the slide. And that way you get that extra runner at first base, that extra light, instead of him being out at first. I wouldn't mind not seeing the shift as much anymore, just because I would love to see also the athleticism of our infielders. And I think it's something that's also lost, that diving play that's made to the left of a shortstop coming up, popping up, and seeing what we grew up watching Ozzie Smith make those plays, or even if it's Gary Templeton, or I can go recent with Omar Vizquel as well. But guys like that had a sixth sense of how to play the game, I think we're losing some of that athleticism and also instincts of the game. But I don't miss not seeing a lot of strikeouts. We're seeing a lot of strikeouts, right? We're seeing pitches that hitters right now, because they're swinging the same way, are having a big hole in the top part of the zone. There are those short amount of hitters, little amount of hitters that can still handle the pitch up, but can still use their legs and handle the pitch down and hit the ball the other way when needed, moving the runners over. All those little things, I think, are things that I miss, and that I miss seeing on a consistent basis, on a nightly basis out there, because players aren't doing it at the minor league. So why should they at the big league level?
Well, let me ask you a question. And this is basically something that nobody does anymore. When was the last time you saw a hitter play pepper?
Well, a lot of those signs say no pepper back there because we were going to mess up the grass, and the grounds crew was going to get upset, right? How many times have we seen, when I played in Japan, Joe, it was, if you didn't take infield, you weren't playing that day. Oh, I'm not going to take infield today. Oh, you're not? Well, you're not playing. That's the bottom line. We don't take infield pre-game anymore. It's the show. In Japan, it's a must thing. Why? Because it's expected. It's part of the show. It's not part of the show here anymore, because we have so many first pitches. We see the other day in St. Louis, I think it was 3 first pitches before a game. And we've seen this, and it's not only St. Louis, it's all over now, where there are so many things going on in the field that we don't see the show that is also the pregame show for the fans, while they're sitting in the stands watching their players do their craft. I think the handling of the bat when it comes to pepper. And pepper, a lot of people think it's about the hitter. It's actually about the defensive guy as well, being able to field that baseball, how to funnel it to the center, sometimes flip it over to the guy in the middle. All those things are right. We have lost it, and I don't see us getting those back either.
But that was my point. My point is handling the bat when you play pepper is to hit it at this field or hit it at that field or whatever. And I mean, because they asked Rod Carew one time, said, what would you hit if they put the shift on you? And he said 900. And I don't think a lot of people realize that his bunting average when he bunted the ball was almost 700. And so they said, well, why didn't you bunt more? He said, because they played in to take the bunt away. I thought I could hit it by him. But I mean, this is the kind of guy that handled the bat. He'd move the batter. And I can remember watching the photos when Henry Aaron passed away. He hit just as many home runs to the opposite field as he hit to the power gap in left center. I mean, this guy hit the ball where it was pitched, as your dad did. And you were talking about the shortstops, and Rita gets on my case all the time. She says, you bring up names that these young people are not going to remember. And you just brought up Ozzie Smith and Gary Templeton. But your dad played with one of the best shortstops of all time. And so it's young. I mean, and I tell people all the time, he'd be in the Hall of Fame if your dad and Joe Morgan and Bates weren't, because he was the best shortstop in baseball at the time. And those little things like that. You mentioned the DH, and I've always said that the DH takes away from the game. It takes away from managing the game. It actually hurts starting pitching because they don't take them out in a normal scope of a game when you need a pinch hitter in the 5th or 6th inning or 7th inning. So guys like Billy Martin and Earl Weaver would burn those starting pitchers out because they weren't going to take them out to go to the bullpen. And then the DH, my biggest pet peeve with the DH is he doesn't have to bat. So Ron Fairley said as soon as they put in the DH back in the 70s, he says, that just gives the pitcher carte blanche to throw it whoever they want to because they don't have to bat. And my biggest example of that is Roger Clemens. When he pitched in the American League, he was a headhunter. I mean, he was a quality pitcher. He was the closest thing to Seaver that I saw, but he would throw at anybody in the American League. Well, when he played for Houston and they were in the National League, he didn't hit anybody all year.
Corn. Here we go. But I think a lot of that has been lost. You know, and the other day, I think we witnessed it in the Astros Red Sox game, where Nate Eovaldi ended up giving up 5 home runs in 1 inning. Can you imagine in the 70s a pitcher giving up 5 home runs in 1 inning and none of them? And I'm not saying a hitter getting hit, but at least they would be moving their feet one way or another.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
They were threatening next. And Nate Eovaldi, none of those pitchers threw in. And this is American League and obviously National League also now with DH. But I was like, okay, you have to at least, come on, show me this. Instead, it was 2 fastballs for home runs, 2 cutters right down the middle of the plate for home runs, and 1 curveball that Yuli Gurriel hit for a home run as well. You know, something has to give one way or another. If not, your bullpen's going to have to come in the 2nd inning and relieve you after a 5-pitch first inning. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Well, I have another issue about games that, and you would remember this because you were around as a kid to see it. But we don't play our playoff games in a time where everything is perfect. And what I mean by that is we don't have any day games in the World Series. And we're starting games at 4:30 in the afternoon so that television,
West Coast. Yeah.
television can get them in a time slot where you're taken away from the game when you start with a shadow between home plate and pitcher's mound. You're taking away from the best hitters in the world. You're helping the pitchers who are already as good, you know, and throw harder than they ever did before. But you're taking away from the fabric of the game when you start at a bad time like that. And I think you should, I think the Players Association says drop the ball because they should say, we either play at 1 o'clock or 7 o'clock. You pick, you know. And, I have a cute story about that. Well, it is about and they're paying a lot of the freight, but how much money is enough? You know what I mean? I mean, I can remember when Bart Giamatti was the president of the National League. He had replaced Chuck Feeney, I think it was. And the commissioner was Peter Ubroth. And we have a playoff game in New York between the Mets and the Dodgers. And it's going to get rained out. There's no way we can play. I mean, it's a deluge. We can't play. So we're going to call the game off, and television went to Giamatti and said, we need prime time tomorrow. And I happened to hear him, and I said, Bart, if you play at 8 o'clock tomorrow night, we can't get to LA for the game the next day. We can't get there. You're going to have to charter a plane for us to get there. So he looked at Ubroth and he says, what do I do? And Peter Ubroth said, tell them you're playing tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And if they want to televise the game, to be there. And that's what he did. He said, the game's at 1 o'clock. And the television people got mad. But he said, we have logistics too. We have to play at 1 o'clock because that's the only time we could play. And that's what we did. But we're cowering to TV for some of this stuff. And everybody says, well, that's where the money is. Okay. But how much is enough money? We need our players to be at their peak performance. We need our umpires to be at our peak performance. The shadow affects the hitter, the catcher, and the umpire more than anybody else.
Yeah. Oh, and I understand 100%. You're absolutely right. I played with the Angels. I remember we had Sunday Night Baseball there, and those games at the time started East Coast at 8 o'clock in the East. At 8 o'clock in the East, that's 5 o'clock right there. We had to face Randy Johnson. And I was like, okay, I love facing Randy Johnson, but not with those shadows. And I had Hideo Nomo in LA at a 5 o'clock start as well. I'm going, okay, great. But you don't want to face this splitter at that time. And then you're right, the umpire not being able to see it as well. But in the postseason, the game that I started for the Cardinals was against Kurt Reeder. And it was one of those, again, shadows, lefty, not Randy Johnson, but still the shadows really nasty. And especially I had a traumatic cataract in my left eye, so I never was able to see from my lead eye at all. So with those shadows and not being able to see from the lead eye, I was, okay, maybe I'll become a collision hitter like what would say.
But those are little things that we're talking about what we could fix and make the game better. I mean, every one of those things is right. I mean, I'm not so big on letting them do the shift, because if the ball player is that bad that he's not going to try to hit it the other way, he deserves to be out. And I mean, even the greatest hitters we had, the Aarons, the Ted Williams, even the Mickey Mantles and the older guys, they could hit the ball the other way, and they would hit it the other way. I mean, when they had the All-Star game at Anaheim, they asked a couple of the young players, one of them was Pedroia. They asked Rod Carew what his favorite song was. And he said the national anthem. And they said, what? I said, yeah, the national anthem. He says, well, why is that your favorite song? He said, because I know when I hear it, I'm going to get 2 hits that day.
That's what I'm going to use that one.
Hey, Eduardo, for you as a player, as a broadcaster, you see some changes in the game. Who's the best player you ever played with, and who's the best player you played against, and how would you stack them up to the players you see today?
Best player I ever played with, Albert Pujols, hands down. Albert Pujols, when I first got to St. Louis from Japan, I had left the Cardinals, and then the year that I went to Japan was the year that Bobby Bowe was with the Cardinals, and he got hurt in spring training. They brought in Albert Pujols, and he never looked back. And I would read up and see about who Albert Pujols was, but then all of a sudden playing with him and being in those hitters meetings with him, and Mitchell Page, who's passed since, was our hitting coach. Albert would sometimes just take over the meeting. And I was like, are you kidding me? And then he would say in the game, this is what I want to do in my next at bat. I'm going to look in a certain spot, and if the pitcher throws it there, I'm going to hit it to right center with authority. And he would do that. To me, hands down, the best player I played with. The best player I ever saw and played against, best player I ever played against, Barry Bonds. I wouldn't miss one pitch, one at bat. There was something special about the way he took pitches. It's not so much that he hit the home runs. It's not so much that he hit the ball hard. It's that he put himself in hitters' counts when he knew that pitchers were sometimes trying to throw the corners, hit the corners, make him uncomfortable. Yet he would wait for his pitch, and he would swing, as he would say later on, at strikes and catch the ball with the barrel. He caught it better than anyone I ever saw.
Yeah, he was quite the hitter. I remember in Houston one time, Phil Garner told the pitcher to throw at him, and he threw a curveball behind him. So I warned the pitcher, because I knew they were throwing at him. You're warned, but it was a curveball, so it's just a warning. So Gardner came out and he said it was a curveball. I said, yeah, that's the only reason he's still here. If it was a fastball, I'd have thrown him out of the game. And I said, he says, when it was behind him. I said, I don't care if it's behind him. He said, we're not doing too good throwing it in front of him. And the next pitch was high and inside, and Barry fouled it off. And he got back to the box and says, Barry, I'm trying to throw this guy in the game for throwing at you, and you foul it off. I can't. And the next pitch hit him right in the ribs. Okay, now you're gone. So,
Hey, can you guys sense trouble? And Joe, you've obviously been in countless games, 5,460.
Every time I saw Joe, I sensed trouble. No,
No, but when you see guys, and maybe there was something that took place in a previous game or a previous series, and maybe there's some bad blood, and even for you, Eduardo, as a player, coach, and manager, can you guys kind of sense what's about to happen, and how do you try and head it off?
I could. I don't know if it's because I grew up in the clubhouse, grew up in the dugout, and you sense what's out there later, but absolutely I could sense it. And, there were times I was thrown out one time by Randy Johnson, who I have a really good relationship now with and everything. But I knew, and I told the players on the team, I said, he's not going to throw at Victor Martinez. This was in 2006 when I was with the Indians. I said, he's going to throw at me. And, we had hit Posada before, and Victor was like, he was nervous. I said, Victor, don't worry, he's not going to hit. Just dig in. He's going to throw at me. And that's exactly what happened. Victor came up. I think he flew out. First pitch to me was literally right, it was right at me, but I already knew. So I was on my heels and I stepped back and missed. And he got ejected from the game on that one. But I sense it when you're playing defense also, and that, something's about to happen as a defensive player. You don't know that maybe the sign was put on or the pitcher's taking it up on his own, but you could sense trouble on the field.
Yeah. Well, I got caught off guard one time. I was working home plate in the All-Star game, and the hitter came up and handed his phone to Yachty or Molina.
No,
guard really caught me off guard. And Yachty turns around and Nelson Cruz put his arm around me, and I had a microphone. I couldn't even tell him to get the hell away from me. I didn't see that one coming.
That was great, by the way. I loved every second of that. That was really good.
So, Joe, when you sense trouble, what do you try and do as an umpire?
Well, if you're working with a young umpire who's behind the plate, you try to let him know. I was in Minnesota one time when the shortstop for the Twins did something to show up the other team, and I walked down between innings. I said, "Now, the third hitter this inning is going to be the shortstop, and they are going to throw at him. When they do, you need to kick him out of the game." I said, "If they get a couple runners on, they may not throw at him." I said, "But if they get 2 outs and he comes up with nobody on base, they're going to throw at him." And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. But so you can tell. I mean, you have a feel for the game. Jerry Crawford's dad, Shag Crawford, umpired in the big leagues for like 20 years. And he used to say, you have to get a feel for the game and understand what's going on. And Shag was really good that way. Bob Engel was good that way. Bob Engel could call the pitches before the pitchers threw them. He studied the game that much. And but you have to pay attention. I think a lot of our problems today is, and it's umpires as well as players. We're relying too much on the analytics and the zone evaluation, this stuff, instead of paying attention to what's going on in the game. I mean, it's like the hitting coach tells the hitter, 70% of the time, 3-2, he's going to throw this pitch, and the hitter goes up and takes strike 3 because it wasn't what the scouting report said. Well, that just blew the analytics right out of the water. you have to pay attention to the game. You have to understand what's going on.
Let me ask you this, Joe, because for me, it's really interesting now with the pitch that the pitchers are using. It also has the middle infielders and one outfielder also can find out what the catcher is sending the message to the pitcher. I've come out and I've said it on air that I believe that the home plate umpire should also have a pitch comm on. If you were to have a pitch comm on as a home plate umpire, and you know that a slider is coming, would that be better or worse for you as an umpire to make a call?
Well, anytime you know what's coming, it's going to be better for you.
Right? That's what I thought. I think that's why I would lobby for umpires to have the pitch comm.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why we have all that extracurricular stuff anyway. I mean, the guy's got the lineup card in his cap. He pulls it out to see how he's supposed to pitch this hitter. I mean, what happened to the scouting report? What happened to having a meeting before the game? I mean, I can.
Oh, we still have those.
Yeah, I mean, you still have.
It's just retaining the information. I think for a lot of those guys is like, wait a second.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's an old story about Tom Seaver and the catcher that they were going to put in to catch for Jerry Grody because Grody was hurt. Was excited because this is going to be the first time he ever caught Tom Seaver. So he didn't go to the pregame meeting to go over the hitters. Okay, it was Tom Seaver. I just put down whatever and he's going to throw it and whatever, right? So the first inning, before he could put down a sign, Seaver's throwing the ball. So he went out after the first pitch, says, well, what are you doing? He said, well, you didn't need to see the scouting report. You didn't want to know what I was going to throw. So you just get back to and try to catch it. Seavers, he didn't take a sign from him all day, and he threw like a 3-hitter. I mean, it was unbelievable, and the catcher, he's scared to death because he doesn't know what Tom's throwing. So, I mean, it makes a difference. I think that, I think this is a team sport and everybody involved has to play like a team. And like you were talking about earlier, this is a family, everybody on the field has something to do, whether it be the bat boy, the ball boy. It could be the usher, the ticket taker. We're all part of this big family. And we're lucky to be witnessing a piece of history every day.
I just want to let you know that I have done all of those. I've been a ball boy with the Phillies. I've been a bat boy also with the Reds at one time. And I also scalped tickets in Montreal. I got to try. And I've done all those three.
Hey, Eduardo, one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is how you watch the game. And maybe some people will say he's a good sign stealer, but you were so observant. And I would imagine that started when you were a kid, being around your dad and all those great players. But is that a lost art in the game now, as far as guys being able to pick up on things maybe most people wouldn't? And I think we see it with Yadier Molina. I think he was the best at paying attention to what's going on around him. But is it a lost art now?
Absolutely. I think it is. And I think it's the organizations, the ones that really have to instill it in the players. But we're seeing now, every time we put cameras in the club, in the dugouts, the players are actually, what they're doing is they're looking at their iPads. They're looking at their iPads to see what's going on and with their at bat, or with the pitcher and how he is throwing the pitch from this visual, instead of looking out on the field to see maybe what the shortstop is doing, what the second baseman is doing. I have so many stories when it comes to that. One was in 1983, when it was the first time I was able to be in uniform during a game. And I was flipping seeds in the dugout with number 43, John Denny, right-handed pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies. And one of the seeds hits Pete Rose in the back, and he looks back, he doesn't pay attention to it. The next one flies right by it. And those sunflower seeds were just, I was nicking them flying, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. All of a sudden, Pete notices that it's me, snaps at me with a few words of profanity. And Pete was like, he's like my uncle. He's like another father figure to me. I grew up in his house in Cincinnati. And then he said, you're going to sit, if you're going to wear a big league uniform, a major league uniform, grab a towel sit in the steps here with me, and you're going to watch every pitch, and you're going to tell me what the pitcher is going to throw before he throws. And I was like, I'm 13 years old. I don't know what the difference between a fastball and a slider, let alone if it's a change up and a curve. But I learned then and there. I learned what pitchers were doing, why they were doing what they were trying to accomplish, but most importantly, what they were doing with their glove. He's like, watch the glove. Angle of the glove will let you know what this pitcher is doing. He could flare. He could move it to the side. It could be the finger, with the index finger with the glove that he wiggles on a fastball, maybe not on a slider or curveball or changeup. He'll do something. Maybe it's a tilt of the head. Whatever it is, the height of the glove. I want you to figure it out. And we're going to watch it and we're going to figure it out. And from that day to who I am now, I can't help but look at the field and look at the pitcher and try to pick something up. And more often than not, even at the big league level, and I did it through my entire college career, did it through an entire minor league career, did it in Japan, did it here. To me, I needed to know, one, because I was legally blind from my left eye, but two, it was just a habit that was created in 1983 because Pete taught me how to be able to pick up pitches. And that's one thing that I would love a lot of players to just focus on the game, help out a teammate one way or another to win a ball game.
Well, that was Pete's biggest asset wherever he went, was he was a winner, and he played to win. And when he went over to the Phillies, he changed their entire outlook of how to play the game because they already had a good team. They had great players at every position. They just didn't know how to close the deal. And Pete taught them that. And I tell people this all the time. I remember Mike Schmidt swinging at a ball in the dirt and strike three and walking back to the dugout. And Pete jumped up on the top step and yelled at him to run. Nobody yelled at Mike Schmidt. Mike Schmidt was the best third baseman in baseball at the time. Nobody in Philadelphia would yell at Mike Schmidt. But Pete did, because he was instilling the fact that this catcher might throw the ball away. You need to run. Ball's in the... And just little things like that with Pete had to have an effect on everybody in the dugout. And because he played with your dad with the Big Red Machine, and I can honestly say they're the best 8 players I ever saw on the field. They didn't have any pitching because they called Sparky Anderson Cap Book, and he knows how to take the pitcher out. I said, well, he had to. They were terrible. They didn't have any pitching. You know, Ringo, one day he said, that's the only team I ever saw that could win 100 games and didn't have any pitching.
You're absolutely, and you're right, but they used their bullpen really well. And, the advancement then in that era, the interesting thing is what I learned mostly in the 70s about the Cincinnati Reds was the unselfishness of the players to be able to switch positions and still be effective. If it was all of a sudden my dad moving from third base to first base, once Lee May got traded and they brought in Joe Morgan to play second base. If it was Pete Rose moving from left field right in the middle of the 75 season because they needed to bring in and plug in George Foster to play left field. And after that, they took on. It was the unselfishness of being quote unquote ball players, all in it for one objective, and that was to win a championship.
Yeah, that they were without a doubt the best 8 players I ever saw at one time on one team. And you're right, they moved Pete Rose to left field, and when they moved Pete Rose to left field when they got Morgan.
Yep.
And then they moved Pete to third base when they got Foster. and you mentioned the name earlier, Ken Griffey Jr. Well, Ken Griffey Sr. was on that team, if you remember.
Yep, and Geronimo as well in center field.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's the best eight players I've ever seen assembled at one time.
That's saying something. When you've seen a whole lot of good teams, a lot of good players.
There they are, right there.
And when you think about it, as I mentioned earlier, the last team in the National League to go back to back, and you think about how long that's been since we've seen it. We've had a whole generation of players come and go since that took place.
Oh yeah.
What was the year that Seaver got traded over there? Was that 78?
My dad left. So my dad left after the 76 season. He got traded for Woody Fryman to the Montreal Expos, and then Seaver came in 77. I want to say 78.
Yeah, I thought when they traded Seaver over there, I said he might not ever lose a game with this team.
And Eduardo, for you, you play with some good players. You talked about a few of them. Who do you like watching now?
Man, Juan Soto. I'm fascinated every time I watch Juan Soto at the plate. Just seems like he doesn't give away a pitch, and I, and then I love the grit and the focus that it's a Bryce Harper has at the plate also. But there are those young players that I'm in awe of because they're so strong. Ronald Acuna Jr., when they hit the ball to right center field, Shohei Ohtani with what he does on the mound and at the plate, the bat speed that he has. I'm fascinated by Nolan Arenado as well because of just the energy that he spends wiggling that bat before that pitch comes, or even on defense, watching him between pitches. I love the dynamic of the movement of players, and it tells me a lot about them between pitches, not when the action is occurring, but between the action. And that means a lot to me. Another player that not a lot of people talk about but just the grit, the body itself is like a Kyle Schwarber. Love that old, big, burly type guy that comes up there and you know what? He has a great hand-eye coordination, and he's able to put the ball in play and hit it with power. So it's not necessarily the big names. Sometimes it's the speedsters. Sometimes it's just the guy that with his Tim Anderson that has a great bat hand-eye coordination, doesn't walk much, is sort of an enigma when it comes to the analytical numbers. Yet he does it. And yes, I'm a big fan of Aaron Judge as well, because a guy that's 6'7" and can weigh 280 some odd pounds and plays center field now and bet on himself and not take a deal to stay in New York, but say, this is what I'm worth and back it up. And oh, by the way, he's arbitration eligible. And when he's arbitration is scary as tomorrow. And he's doing stuff like he's doing. It's crazy to me. But overall, I'm a fan of baseball. I'm in love with the game because it's the game and it's the sport that got my dad out of Cuba. It's the game and the sport that put a roof over our head. And before putting a roof over our head, it was also the sport that took him to Puerto Rico to meet my mom. And because of baseball, I'm here. That's the reason I exist. And I know that. And no matter how much I give to the game, it will never be enough to what the game has been able to provide to our entire family. And every time my kids or my girls are like, oh, baseball, I'm like, just look up. They know exactly what that is. Exactly that's what I say.
That's awesome. Every young umpire I ever worked with, I always tell them you have three responsibilities. Your first responsibility is to the game of baseball. And that might not mean the commissioner's office. It means the game, fabric of the game, because you're the only official representative of the game on the field. Your second responsibility is to your profession. And that might not mean the umpire's union, but to the profession of umpire. You have to do what's right for that profession. And your third responsibility is do what you know is morally honest and correct in your heart. And if you do those things in that order, nothing you do out there will be wrong. You'll probably be hated for it. Somebody will try to kill you for it, but nothing you do will be wrong. And you'll be able to go home and sleep at night. And you know what? That theory has helped me through all kinds of stuff. Just some of the trials and tribulations that you go through as an umpire, you're hated by half the people. And sometimes you're hated by the majority of people because you're making a call that goes against the home team. But you have to think like that. And it's tough. You made a statement one time. I forget who you were talking to. Might have been Tim Kirchin or someone.
I was about to say it right now too.
Well, you go ahead and say it.
Okay, so Tim Kirchin is writing this article and covering Joe, and he notices, that I have a really good relationship with many, but really good relationship with Joe. And he goes, tell me something about Joe. And I said, look, I were in court and and all of a sudden Joe's the judge and he sentences anyone, let's say, to a 10-year sentence fairly, he'll be the guy there waiting for you the day you come out of jail. He'll pick you up. Let's go. But he is going to sentence you fairly, no matter if you're a friend or not. He's going to see it the right way, the just way. And sometimes you're not going to like it. But one thing you can say is he's always going to be consistent and you will always, always be your friend and he'll be there for you. But he's not going to be biased. He'll be right down the middle. And to me, that's an unbelievable asset to have. Not everybody has that asset. And Joe, you've always had it. And people say, oh, he's controversial. He's this. What? He was right. At the end of the day, was he right or was he wrong? He was right. And sometimes right doesn't mean you're going to like it.
That's a great point you make. Now, you're talking about Joe West here, right?
and you know what, though, Mike? I would say this even if he wasn't there, because I have said it when he wasn't there. And not to a lot of people's liking because, hey, Joe did. Yeah, but was he right?
And that's the thing I think a lot of people won't accept when they get it right. It may not be the thing they want to hear or obviously see, but as long as you get it right, I think that's the bigger issue. And I think that's what baseball's working on now, getting it right when it comes to replay, when it comes to the computer as far as strikes are concerned, getting it right. And it's amazing how we expect that from the officials when the players don't get it right. I mean, you have guys that go 0 for 4, go 0 for 12. They may go 0 for the week, and they're not frowned upon in the same manner if an umpire misses a call that may sway a game in one direction or another. I always feel like there's enough accountability in the dugout with guys who don't do their job.
Yeah. And I tell players, and I tell them beforehand, I said, look, when I'm broadcasting games, if you make a physical error, anybody can make a physical error, right? Ground ball just kicks back up, hits you right here, picks off, physical error, you throw it away, physical error. Now, if you make a mental error at this level, this is Major League Baseball. It's the highest level of all. I have to break that down. I have to say that's unacceptable. And I've always told players the same thing. When an umpire makes a strike one call and he calls it a ball, he calls it a strike, or he calls it a ball against the pitcher, you see a lot of guys lose it. And I'm like, that's just strike one. It's strike one. Stay focused. So be it. But what I notice is a lot of players pitch this much out, and they might say, and it's strike 3, and they don't swing at it. They get all riled up. They get all mad, and we don't pay attention to that. Now, do we pay attention to something like this? Yeah. And what we have our mental lapses, that's a mental lapse. That to me, and maybe I've never stood behind the plate, but that's their craft. And if it's a pitch that's missed by a lot, yeah, I'm verbally going to say something, acknowledge it. Why? Because the fan also sees it. And I have to make sure what you saw is, yeah, I'm not in agreement with what you saw at all. But again, if it's a pitch by this much, or even 5 inches or whatever it may be, 4 inches, we're not going to say as much on TV as unless it's something that most likely was a mental lapse. And let's not forget what they see in today's game behind the plate is a minimum of like 300 pitches per game. The minimum of 300 pitches. They're going to miss pitches. The machine's going to miss pitches. You know why? Because it was built by humans. And that curveball, once it hits the dirt, catcher catches it out in front, and it's going to call it a strike because it's 3-dimensional. Then that's when those dilemmas are going to happen. But I do like what they're doing in that Southeastern League, formerly known as the Florida State League, where it's umpires calling it, and then the hitter, you check that real quick, and you have one check or whatever it is. Yeah, it was a strike, or it was a ball. It's seamless. It's quick. But to have it automated the entire time, I think it loses the essence of the job that they have been put in there to do. And we still have to have that human element. I love the human element of the game. It brings up discussions. It brings back history. from all the history that's happened in the past, and that's why I'm a little purist when it comes to that.
All right, before we get out of here, I've got some quick hits for both you guys.
Quick?
Yeah. Well, there's no such thing as quick when we talk.
Thank you. Okay, man.
All right, so this goes for both you guys. Best city to work in, best city to play in.
Want to go first, Joe?
Well, that was easy. Before they put up the lights, I loved Wrigley Field. But when they put the lights up, I couldn't even make happy hour. I had trouble making last call.
What about you, Eduardo?
Oh man, I you know what though? He is absolutely right about Wrigley Field. What a town! What a great place! Best home place to play for. I loved playing in St. Louis. I loved it because of the fans. I'm not saying that because you're here, Mike. I'm not saying that at all because of it. It's a sea of red coming in. It's kind of weird, and it was really cool that I stayed right across the street in the stadium the other day on Saturday and Sunday, and that was surreal looking out the window and seeing Busch Stadium right there. But
all right,
I enjoyed playing in San Francisco also because of where I work the booth. I like where it's at. I think it's a really cool level. It's lower than all the other booths, and we can really call the game and see it well.
You mentioned happy hour, Joe. So what's the best bar in baseball?
A lot of those.
By the way, my first big league experience with Joe, actually, and I remember he was wearing that beautiful belt buckle of his, was San Diego. And San Diego, we're still playing at the Murph. We're still out there. They called the Qualcomm after the Murph. But I walk in to a sports bar, and who do I find? Joe West right there.
That's great.
Yes, he greeted me and said, "Welcome to the show, son."
I flew to Montreal to work up there for the weekend series. And who's on the plane with us but Payne Stewart? And he recognized us when we got on the plane. And he said something about us being umpires. I said, yeah. I said, do you know Mark Russell and John Brindle? And Mark Russell and John Brindle are PGA Tour officials. Just like we are umpires for baseball, they were tour officials for the PGA Tour. And Payne said, yeah, I rent a house to John Brindle. I said, well, then you must get a lot of favorable calls. So anyway, I said, where are you staying? He said, I'm at the Queenie. I said, well, we're at the Marriott around the corner. I said, go check in. I'll pick you up. I take you to this little pub. It's called Ziggy's. And it's across the street from Sir Winston Churchill's. And it's a downstairs pub. And when we walk in, Ziggy, the owner, Ziggy Eichenbaum, comes up and says, do you want tickets for the golf tomorrow? And I said, no, I really don't. So he goes right to Payne Stewart and he says, would you like some tickets? The bartender grabbed him by the collar. He said, he's playing in it. So I had a rule with Ziggy because he couldn't use 3 or 4 sentences without using profanity. And I don't like to hear profanity in front of women. So I said, every time you use profanity, Ziggy, you got to give all the women at the bar a shot. Okay. And 2 sentences later, he'd fire off an F-bomb or something crazy. And so Payne Stewart thought that's the funniest thing he ever saw. Well, of course, the women loved it until about 45 minutes later, they can't sit in their chairs anymore. So the next night we worked the game, we come back in there, and who's tending bar but Payne Stewart? And Ziggy said another piece of profanity across the bar, and Payne said, hey, hey. And Ziggy waved his hand. So Payne poured all the women at the bar a shot, just like nothing happened.
Final question for both you guys. The one person in the game that you look forward to seeing because you knew they were going to make you laugh.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. I have to go with Lenny Harris. See? Right there. That's the reaction.
Yeah. He was a good one.
Lenny Harris, every time I saw him, it was something out of his mouth would come out. You're like, okay, this brightens your day. And he'd call anybody out. You're talking about a player calling anybody out. didn't matter if they were a star player or not. He knew what his role was, and it was to enforce that those star players stayed in the lineup. Because you stay in the lineup, I got a job to do, and that's pinch hit when I needed to pinch hit, come in and spell you once in a while. But for me, Lenny Harris.
Yeah. Well, I had a bunch of them, and McSherry was one of the funniest guys in the world.
Sherry.
Dutch Rinnert. One day, Joe Torre came out and he says, Dutch, he says, how come is it you're so good behind the plate and you're so horse shit on the bases? Dutch says, you know, that's kind of funny, Joe, but it's true, isn't it? He was funny, didn't mean to be, you know. But there's a lot of good humor out there, and I know why Eduardo got on this podcast. He just wanted some more new material, Mike. That's what it was.
I can't wait for the next broadcast. That's for sure.
Mike, you bring me on anytime you want because I need great material from Joe.
Hey, Eduardo, it's been a treat to have you on, my friend, and we appreciate everything you do for the game on the air, off the air, and just how you promote the game in a manner that we all appreciate. And I want to thank you for being part of our show today.
Well, I appreciate you guys for mentoring me and having me in this position right here. But most important, next time I come on, I got to bring the old man on with me. So
we'll do it.
That'll be fun.
We'll do it soon.
That'll be fun.
For Joe West and Eduardo Perez, I'm Mike Claiborne. We thank you for tuning in and checking out 5460, the Joe West podcast. I'm Mike Claiborne. We thank you once again. Have a great day.